It's good to hear the old stories, isn't it? We need to remind ourselves often of these things. And mind you, when I say old stories, I don't mean old fictions. We tell the story not so that we can convince ourselves of its truth, but so that we can find ourselves in the midst of the story. You see, there is a difference between stories that try to tell you the facts of what happened and stories that are intended to convey the truth. And sometimes truths are greater than facts. Now, I've got a pretty decent sermon about the facts of resurrection. At least I think it's decent, but I wouldn't write it if I didn't think it's decent. I try to convince you of the facts of resurrection, present you with the evidence, and give you an opportunity to respond to the facts. But sometimes in our search for the facts, we miss the truth. The truth sometimes in the story is bigger than the facts. I can tell you the facts about coffee or the facts of life, but we won't go down that road. But I could tell you all about the coffee plant. I could tell you all about the coffee bean. I could even tell you all about the lemur that eats the coffee bean and the harvesters that go and pick the coffee bean out of the lemur's remains. And then roast said bean and sell it. I want to try some of that coffee just once. Right? I can tell you all these facts, and all of the facts at the end of the day mean nothing if you don't pour that first cup of coffee in the morning. Yeah, you can know all about it, but until you take that sip, until you experience it, the facts mean nothing. So my intent today is not to convince you of the facts. Make no mistake, I believe this with all of my heart. And maybe you need the facts before you can believe, and there is a time and a place for that. But we in the church have spent a lot of time and spilled a lot of ink trying to convince people of the facts of the stories. Isn't it amazing? It's not the secular world that goes looking for Noah's Ark. It's the Christian world. I wonder sometimes who we're trying to convince. You see, the facts of the story, while they may be important, sometimes need to be set aside in order for us to see the truth of the story. This is the experience of Christ. And resurrection is not something just to be recapitulated. It's not something just to be rehashed. It's not facts that we just tell and retell. It's a story that finds its place in our life. It's the truth. It's the truth. And at the end of the day, that's what we want. It's truth that transforms, not facts. It's truth that causes something that is dead and lifeless and hollow to become something that is breathed with a new sense of reality, a new sense of life, a newness and a purpose. The truth is bigger than just the facts. Mind you, not separate from them, but transcending them. So this story, in a sense, makes real what has been hidden. There is something hidden in these stories that the facts don't convey, but the truth of the story evidences. And that's what we want. There's a sense in which we are telling the story in order to make it real in our life. The experience. This struck me just this week with a profound certainty when I was reading an old children's book. Actually, the book is 100 years old. 101 years old. Almost as old as my father-in-law. Come on, it's Easter morning. I've got to get one jab in. I was actually out working on my fence, which still has a big hole in the middle of it because, I got distracted. I'm like Doug the dog from Up, squirrel, and so this book had come up in one of the other things I was studying, and I thought, I actually don't remember ever having read this book all the way through. I know I knew the story. I knew I had heard it, and I knew it had been read to me as a kid, but I didn't remember ever reading it myself. So I ordered a copy of it, but even before I ordered that copy, I found that Audibles had it for free. So I was out working on my fence with my earbuds in, because the teachers at the school are loud. No, this side of the room. I'm not going to look over here. Right, but so I had my earbuds in, and I was working on the fence, and I listened to the story, and I found myself out there pouring concrete, weeping, like a man. Says the guy in a white vest and white bow tie. Those commercials about low T, they're for me. Whatever. I'm okay with it. It's all good. So I was out there listening to this story, and it got me. You ever been gotten by a story like that? Maybe you figured out the story. I didn't entitle this message very subtly. The Velveteen Rabbit. Isn't that such a great story? I don't know if you remember the story, but what sparked my interest in it when the book that I was reading was a line that I didn't remember but came up in this other work, and it made this comment: everything that is real was imagined first. Oh, I like that. Everything that is real was imagined first. You see, this book, this little children's book, is about becoming real. Now, the facts of the story, actually, there are no facts to that story. But the irony is even though there are no facts to the story, there is a profound truth. And that truth brings relevance to our life even on this day, this deep truth, this deep wisdom, this sense that was revealed in these worn covers of that old story, this coming of age, this becoming real that is in this book. You see, I want to talk about what it means to be real. We say that, don't we? Well, can I be real with you? Usually that means, can I be a complete jerk? and then we finish with the line, well, no offense. No offense. And anytime we start or finish with that line, we're liars. We meant the offense. The offense was intended. But this book is about this becoming real, this sense of what is real and what is coming out of the lifelessness of our reality. You see, we live in a world that seems very real, but the realness of this world is not a realness that we often enjoy. The reality of the world is that it comes with purposelessness, pain, and suffering. It's realized both in the good and the bad. The reality of the world. It's in the ecstasy of the first sip of coffee in the morning. You sense a theme. I need some coffee. It's in that ecstasy. It's in the reality of the slap of every mosquito on our skin. This is real. This is real life. Or the splatter of every moth on our windshield. Isn't that annoying? It's the ecstasy of the marriage bed and the torment of the closed casket lid. This is life, isn't it? It is with the birth of every child that we sense a kind of reality that we get to watch unfold even in their eyes. What is real? This nosebleed has lasted 3 days. I'm going to do this without splattering my pretty vest. Some would say that this reality is accidental, that this reality is unimagined and has no purpose but to exist and to die. Some live in that reality. Some live in the reality of a purposeless existence. This is what it means to be real. I think there's a bigger truth and a better reality. So others, and I am one of them, say that there is an imagination beyond creation itself. An imagination that dreamed of you and me, this world, and honeysuckle, and pomegranates, and pinky toes, and personality, and possibilities. There is an imagination beyond this reality that knows that what is real was first imagined by a creator. Some would say, and I am one of them, that you are the reality of the dreamer of this world. You are the reality of this dreamer. I'm just going to keep that here with me, if that's okay. But the problem is that dream was marred. That dream began to fall apart because reality always has a way of destroying itself. When the dream begins to take on a life of its own and tries to separate itself from the dreamer, then it all begins to fall apart. You see, it's the dreamer who makes it real. The one who dreamt of you, dreamt for you, dreams the you that you are supposed to be. That dreamer is who makes it all real. The dream does not dream itself. That's annihilation. When that happens, reality begins to fall apart. You see, this is the reality we know so well. When every dream becomes a nightmare and every hope ends in a tomb. So, forgive my foray into this old children's story, but it speaks to me of something that is universal. In fact, in a subtle kind of alchemy, it tells the Christ story, woven in and throughout these pages, the story of becoming real. That is really what the Christ story is about. Jesus is not just God on some kind of mission, like a divine Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi, the Blues Brothers, on a mission from God. He's not just some God on some kind of mission. It's so much bigger than that. You see, Jesus he is truly God. That is, he is true, but he is also truly human, fully human. Jesus, you see, is what it means to be human. I hate this line that we say in the church and in the world. Well, I'm only human. I hate that. We're more than only human. We are created in the image of God. And Jesus is the image of what it looks like to be human, truly human. We dare not say we are only human, because Jesus is the true humanity, and we would not say that of him. In fact, Jesus is the realest of the real. Jesus is on mission, yes, but it is to make real that which has fallen prey to the nightmare of the dreaming itself. He makes real what sin has made unreal. In the Velveteen Rabbit, we learn that becoming real, we learn what becoming real means. One day, the rabbit, a fairly new toy, has an existential conversation. Even toys have existential crises. I feel like I'm in good company. He has an existential conversation with an old rocking horse in the nursery who was the oldest of all of the other toys in the nursery. Here's what the conversation says. Real isn't just how you were made, said the skin horse. It's a thing that happens to you when a child loves you for a long, long time. Not just to play with, but really loves you. Then you become real. The rabbit asks, does it hurt? Sometimes, said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. When you are real, though, you don't mind being hurt. Does it happen all at once, like being wound up, asked the rabbit, or bit by bit? The skin horse said, it doesn't happen all at once. You become. It may take a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you cannot be ugly except to people who don't understand. Isn't that beautiful? So this is what the rest of the story is about. That very thing, about becoming real. In this story, it happens twice in the Velveteen Rabbit. And here I think we begin to hear our gospel story once again. You see, the first time it happens is after the rabbit has been accidentally left outside. The little boy insists that he must find his bunny before bed. Of course, by now the bunny is misshapen. He's been well loved, and he's barely recognizable as a rabbit. So when Nana finds him in the flower bed with leaves and debris all over him, she remarks sternly to the boy, you must have your old bunny fancy the fuss over a toy. Give me the bunny, the boy said. You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real. There's a kind of resurrection in there, isn't it? This first resurrection, when the love of the boy makes the stuffed bunny real. You see, real happens when you realize that you are loved, truly loved. Do you begin to hear the gospel story in this? It is what happens when the dreamer sees you, sees beyond your brokenness, sees beyond the worn-out lives that have accumulated all of the years of hurts and wounds and the debris of the broken world. We do that when we live in the mess of the world. The mess tends to mess us up, but the dreamer knows who you are, and he loves you beyond the brokenness. You are real, not because you are without fault, but because he sees you beyond it. The dreamer sees you. It's a kind of resurrection. That's why I am drawn especially to John's version of the resurrection narrative of Christ. I love this version of it. Here we are given a picture of the Jesus who has lived as the only true human. The brokenness of the world that has destroyed him and left him misshapen, crucified, and buried. But it wasn't the world's love for him that killed Jesus. It was Jesus' love for the world that destroyed him. Because that's what love does. Love sacrifices itself for the sake of the other. It's like the old joke goes, which really isn't a joke at all. Why did Jesus cross the road? To get to the other. This is what the gospel is about. Getting to the other. And we are the other. And Jesus crossed that road, crossed that hill, crossed that boundary of the grave to get to our brokenness, because as the dreamer, he knew who he had created us to be. But now he has come out of the tomb. He wasn't just raised up, he was resurrected. That means that all of the brokenness of the world that he had accumulated as the only true human stayed in the grave, where all that is unreal, the nightmare of the dream, dreaming itself, stayed gone. Do you hear the good news of this? You see, this is what the cross does, is it accumulates all of our brokenness, all of our infirmity, all of our illness, all of our fault, all of the things that have ruined us through the years and through our life. He puts it all into one place so that when it is put into the ground, all of it is put into the ground with him. Amen. All that has made us unreal, all that has threatened to unravel our reality goes into the ground. And when it goes into the ground, it stays in the ground. You see, this is what the story is about. So when Jesus came out of the tomb on that day, the only thing that really existed in him was all that truly was and is. It was reality becoming real for all of creation. And when his resurrected reality encountered Mary, one of his most devoted followers, do you know, we would have no gospel if it was not for the women of the story. The women who were at the cross when everyone else had fled. The women who went to the tomb early in the morning when everyone else was still in bed, all of the dudes. The women who became the first proclaimers of the good news. Mary Magdalene, do you realize, was the first gospel preacher? Because when she heard that Jesus was risen, when she encountered Jesus with her own eyes, her own lives, she ran back and preached to the disciples, the dummies who were too stupid to stick around and see it. She preached to the disciples. She proclaimed the good news. And so when he encountered Mary, one of his most devoted followers, it changed her as well. It gave her a new reality, a greater reality. She who had been there from the beginning, she whose own story was one of heartache and brokenness, she was there in the graveyard. All she knows is that the tomb was empty. She had run and told the other disciples, two of whom went to see for themselves. We assume John and his buddy Peter. But they had come and gone, and now she was alone in the graveyard. Then suddenly she sees a man. She assumes it's the gardener. This is exciting to me that the cemetery becomes a garden in this story. Do you see how this moves? The cemetery, the place of grief, the place where we put all of our hopes and our dreams, pack it in underground, becomes a place of birth and life, of a new beginning. The cemetery becomes a gardener. She sees this man. She assumes he is the gardener. This is not the garden that we are familiar with. You see, this is a new garden. It's not the Garden of Eden where the story started, but no, this is a garden of a new beginning, a new kind of Eden. It is the garden of grief now become joy. God's work of resurrection always begins in the places of our greatest sorrow, our most profound failure, where only death seems to be real. Hear this as a truth for us today. God's work begins in the cemetery of our life. Isn't this good news? Because so often we have been waiting until the circumstances were just right. We have been hoping for Christ to show up at the right moment when everything's good, when our stupid noses aren't bleeding, when our hearts are keeping pace, when the cancer is gone, when the music is just right, when the chairs are comfortable, when my life doesn't have to worry about the next bill or the next doctor's appointment or the next whatever. We're waiting for Christ to show up at the right time, and we never thought to look in the places of our own death. That's where Christ begins. In the cemetery, he makes us real in the place of our brokenness. This is where it begins. And so this is where Jesus begins. So when he wakes up from the grave, he begins to wake everyone else up around him. Woman, he says to Mary, the same title he used for his own mother. Why are you weeping? Whom do you seek? Oh, sir, if you have carried his body away, tell me so that I can get it and move it myself. Oh, the love of Mary. How did she think she was going to move the body of Christ, now wrapped in over 70 pounds of linens and spices? But it didn't matter. She loved him. She was going to do what it took. And we smile because we know the rest of the story, but poor Mary did not. And then, with one word, her eyes are open. Maybe her tears are dried. What's that one word? It's her name. Mary. He just calls her by name. That's it. That was it. He just says her name. He who has always known us. He who has always dreamt of us and dreamed for us. He who knows who we are. He who knows who we truly are. He sees her and he calls her by name. And in that instant, she knew him as well. You see, there is a kind of resurrection here. Not just what happened to Jesus, but also what happened to Mary. I know her resurrection was not the same as Jesus's. However, in that moment, when all of Mary's hopes and dreams, plans and futures, past and failures had fallen apart, Jesus speaks her name, and she wakes up to the realness of being known by God. Some of us need that kind of resurrection today, where we wake up to the realness of being known by God, the dreamer behind all that is truly real. We need that kind of resurrection, the kind that hears our own names being spoken by God, the kind of resurrection that does not ignore the graveyards we have found ourselves in, or the brokenness that has seemed to define the nightmare of our existence. We need the resurrection of being loved. We need to hear our name once again. Yet even this is not the end of the story. You see, just like the Velveteen Rabbit, we who are reading the story know that while the boy may see the bunny as real, the rest of us can tell the difference. We can tell the difference between a stuffed old toy and a real-life bunny. Even the boy does not make the mistake of thinking the stuffed rabbit the same as the rabbits that jump around his garden. You see, what is real for the boy and for the bunny is a reality that is still quantitatively different than really real. It has a difference that anybody can recognize. So when the boy gets ill, if you know the story with scarlet fever, and the nursery needs to be cleared out of anything that might be infectious, like hepatitis C. Kidding. It's not the story. But when the nursery needs to be cleared out of anything that might be infectious, we are sad in the story to see the old Velveteen bunny is taken out and put in a burn pile behind the hen house. He's been real to the boy, but now the bunny himself presents a problem. And as he lay in the cold, awaiting his fate, he remembered all the happy days he had had with the boy, and he cried a single, real tear. And it splashed on the ground and watered a flower that began to suddenly bloom and grow, and out of the middle of the opening flower head, a fairy emerged. I believe in fairies, by the way. Why not? I am the nursery magic fairy, she said, and I take care of all of the playthings that the children have loved. When they are old and worn out and children don't need them anymore, then I come and take them away with me and turn them into real. Wasn't I real before? Asked the rabbit. You were real to the boy, the fairy said, because he loved you. Now you shall be real to everyone. Here it is, the hope that we have for all of creation. The resurrection of Christ promises us a kind of realness that will unfold for all of creation someday. You see, you are made real in Christ when you recognize how much He loves you, when you finally hear Him say your name. You don't have to wait for him to say it. You just need to listen for it because he's been saying it all along. But there is a coming day when he will speak the name of everything in creation, everything that belongs to the dreamer. He will call it all by name. And what has been real for some of us, just because we've loved it, will now become real for all because God loved it first. It will become real for us all. You see, all of creation will be resurrected. Oh, I wish we would get this in the church. We have taught bad theology that has said that the whole point of Jesus coming to earth was to take us out of here, and that's wrong. The whole point of Jesus coming to earth is to sanctify the fact that the earth was created very good by God and will one day be raised by God. And when it is raised, we will be raised with it by God. Do you know this? When we lay our loved ones in the cemetery, we are not walking away from a corpse. We are planting a seed. And someday that seed will sprout. And the dead in Christ will rise first. That is an act of faith. You see, there is not just a resurrection from the dead for Jesus that tells us someday we go to heaven. There is a resurrection from the dead that tells us that someday, one day, we will be resurrected the same way, and all of creation will be as well. I look forward to that day. Paul talks about it in Romans 8. He says, "For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now." The groans of childbirth. Do you feel them? Here's irony. I feel the groans of these moments, the groans of this present world. We know that all of creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth. Not only the creation, but we ourselves, who are the first fruits of the Spirit. For we groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as children, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we are saved. You see, here is what this is telling us. What happened in Christ will happen for all of creation. There is a realness that is promised to all of creation. Easter's message is not Jesus rose from the dead so that we can just go to heaven. That misses the point altogether. To say that Jesus' resurrection within creation, the created order, is given as a way for us to escape creation is a kind of blasphemy. God did not create the world in order to throw it away. God did not create your body in order to just let it rot in the grave. He has promised that there is coming a day when all of the infection of sin, like the scarlet fever in the little boy's nursery, will finally be purged, and all that remains is what is really real. That means that when we speak of a risen and a resurrected Christ, we are speaking of a future reality for all things in which our bodies are resurrected into a world that is fully redeemed. We do not lay our loved ones in the ground in hopeless despair. No, we plant them like seeds of faith that will spring up on that day. This is what it means to follow Christ. You see, we dedicate our lives to creating many resurrections all around us. So here we come to it all. At the end of the morning, at the beginning of the new day, we come to it all, and we recognize that the resurrection that Christ promises begins for us this day, this moment, right now, as He speaks each of our names. And we become real. It's not really real yet. We know that, but there is a reality, just like Mary in the garden, where we begin something new altogether, but that newness gives way to a realness that will never give way to death again. This is what we live for. It's what we sing about. It's what our faith is. And so the question for you today is, have you heard Him speak your name? Because this is where resurrection begins. This is what we call salvation. Have you heard Him speak your name? He's speaking it now. In our gospel, it was the single name Mary. But we could repeat that name 150 times this morning and hear it in 150 different ways for each one of us. You see, this is the hope of our faith. This is the purpose of our being. This is the purpose of our becoming. Resurrection is the rousing of our faith from the slumber of the nightmare. It is that moment when we hear the voice of the dreamer calling us by name. The moment when, like Mary, we fall down and we worship Him who has dreams of realness for each of us. It is the promise of a future reality that is more real than anything you have ever experienced. When all of the remnants of the nightmare are finally purged and all that is resurrected is the reality of God's intention for all of creation, the dreamer dreaming you into existence. So in the words of the apostle from Ephesians chapter 5, awake, O sleeper, arise from the dead, and Christ will shine upon you. Amen.